So, today I will be explaining my project, which I'm calling the Dimension Project. To get started, let's have a look at this patch called Test Amplitude. What we have going on here is, let's just send in these messages. Cool. So, we have the sine wave, we're sending it through this patch here, and then we're getting it back out. And you can see here, this thing is a dimension called amplitude. And what that means is that the number we send in here is going to be the dimension value. And with dimensions, the value ranges from 0 to 1. So this dimension object is an object that I made. It takes in another object, which is also an object that I made. In this case, it's amplitude. So the way I have it working is that if I set this to 0.5, then we can see the amplitude went down as half. If I do 0.25, you can see it will go down again. It's updated here. We could bring it back up, say a reasonable value like 0.8. Now, what you see here is this is the process. So every dimension has the ability to process a signal, and it also has the ability to evaluate a signal, and that's what we're seeing here. So the process is actually changing the audio and outputting it, whereas the evaluate is purely operating on this input signal. So right now we can see, since this is at full volume, 0 dB, this is hovering around 1.0 for this output, this evaluation of the amplitude. If we drop this lower, then we'll see this number starts to go down over here. So this is a very basic dimension called amplitude. And now we'll look at what a dimension actually looks like in the general case. So this is the dimension template. So let's just turn our audio off real quick. Alright, so now this is what a dimension is in the more general sense. It's an object which takes in an audio signal, left and right channels, and then using some dimension value, which has to range from 0 to 1, it modifies the signal in some way and sends it out, as well as it processes the signal for some value of the dimension and then sends that out here. So the idea is that the input signal should have, like, let's say the input signal were to be the output of some other process where the input to that process was a certain dimension value. We're trying to figure out what that dimension value was and send that out here. So we're telling the user, hey, the signal you sent in had this dimension value. Meanwhile, if you want to change the dimension value, you can do that too, sending it into here and getting that out there. So this is an abstraction for this idea, and we can make different patches that all do this. So the one I made here is amplitude. Then there are other dimensions. The most basic dimensions of sound and music that you could think of are, of course, amplitude and frequency. But frequency, I think, is actually a lot less straightforward than amplitude, because, like, how do you represent? Like, you could use MIDI notes. You could think about the actual pitch. And so I just chose, and this is what's nice about having a dimension, is you can just make every implementation and then easily swap them out. So let's look at it here, and let's look at one that I made called just frequency. This one is just called frequency. So let's get this one going, and let's take a listen. So as you can see, right now it sounds really weird. The reason is because I'm using Max's pitch shifting, and so here's frequency. The reason is we're using Max's pitch shifting, and we're pitch shifting it by a large amount, and it's also just a sine wave. So we have a lot of weird artifacts, but essentially what's going on with this is that I'm mapping the dimension value, which is going from 0 to 1, across all frequencies on the human spectrum of being able to hear, so 20 to 20,000. So then, as you can see here, let's make a sine wave of 440 hertz, right? Okay, now I could pitch this around to, like, any crazy value. Like, I could do 0.0, like 2 or whatever. But what we're getting out here is, notice it's telling us, hey, the value which corresponds to the frequency that was sent in was 0.02. So if we send 0.02, this should not modify the pitch. And as you can see, we get something that sounds roughly like 440 hertz. So, right, as I was saying, this frequency, this specific implementation of the frequency object is definitely not ideal. It's just an idea to see what it might look like. But we could also use another one that I made. Oh, let's just show another frequency, because I think this one, it doesn't always sound this bad. Honestly, I think this sounds kind of cool, but it's not really what it's supposed to be. What if we do this? Right. Okay. So that sounds more reasonably like 660 hertz. And we could also notice we could put this back at this and force it to be 440 hertz. So that's the whole idea with frequency. Okay, but let's use another frequency implementation. Let's use one I made called scale by 2-factor frequency. Scale by 2-factor frequency. Now, what is this doing? Instead of scaling the frequencies to range the entire frequency spectrum, now we're actually just going to be scaling the original input signal down to half its input and up to twice its input. And since that's the full range, and our range of the dimension value goes from 0 to 1, that means if we send in a 0 here, we should get an octave below the original pitch. If we send a 1 here, we should get twice the original pitch. So now using this, we can just, I think the pitches that we're getting are a bit more reasonable. And the reason this is outputting a 1 is just because if you think about what dimension value any input signal has, because what we're doing to the signal is actually scaling it, there's no way that can be an intrinsic value to the signal, and like the frequency of the signal with respect to itself is always just 1. So that's why this is a 1 here. I know that's slightly inconsistent with the way I did amplitude before. So there's definitely still room for improvement with respect to how exactly the dimensions are represented in the sound, some of those structures. But the idea with this project is this actual dimension object, which is able to take in these implementations and then manipulate sound with them. So I'm going to be using these in my next project and making better implementations and putting them together in some interesting ways.